For NPP, medical doses were usually around 25 to 50 milligrams per week. Also, for both men and women among athletes, the most common dose for both nandrolone decanoate and NPP ranges between. When we hear the name Deca, we directly think about adding extreme size in the off-season. It is one of the oldest anabolic steroids ever used by bodybuilders, and for decades, it was always the go-to compound to get huge. It was heavily favored by old school bodybuilders, and it earned its place as a true off-season mass builder. However, over the years, its popularity has declined a lot. So, to truly understand if Deca is worth it today, we need to break it down from every angle. So, in this video, we are going to cover everything about Deca, also known as nandrolone decanoate. Not only that, we are also going to cover NPP, which is the fast-acting version of nandrolone. We are going to dive deep into their history and medical uses, their unique properties, and how they work in the body, including their half-lives and mechanism of action. Additionally, we'll explore their role in modern bodybuilding, including real-world dosages, benefits, side effects, and what to expect when using them. We will also cover their effects on mental health and sense of well-being, and of course, when and in which phases they should be used. So, if you are a bodybuilder, an athlete, or just someone who is curious about nandrolone, this video is going to cover everything you need to know about it. And now, let's start with the history and medical uses of nandrolone. Nandrolone Phenylpropionate, or NPP, was first described in 1957. This was actually before nandrolone decanoate, which came out 3 years later in 1960. Both forms of nandrolone were originally developed by the well-known pharmaceutical company Organon. NPP was introduced to the market under the brand name Durabolin, while nandrolone decanoate was released as a Deca Durabolin, which is a very well-known trade name for nandrolone decanoate. These compounds were used medically for several conditions, including osteoporosis, advanced breast cancer, muscle wasting diseases, some forms of anemia, and even to help rebuild muscle tissue after surgeries. Over the years, the pharmaceutical production of nandrolone decanoate increased, while the production of NPP by pharmaceutical companies slowly declined. Today, the original brand name Deca Durabolin and Durabolin are no longer available. However, nandrolone decanoate is still widely produced and available in generic forms. And of course, it is still produced by underground labs. For NPP, it is mostly produced now by underground labs rather than by major pharmaceutical companies. And now, let's talk about the structure and characteristics of nandrolone. Nandrolone is the name of the compound, and it is produced in two different forms: nandrolone decanoate, which is the long ester, and nandrolone phenylpropionate, or NPP, which is the short ester. I have to make one thing very clear. Both types of nandrolone are the exact same compound, and they act in the body in the exact same way. The only difference is the type of ester attached to it, and the esters determines how fast the hormone is released from the injection site to start doing its job in the body. It also determines the half-life of the hormone, which means your injection schedule needs to be adjusted depending on which ester you are using. Nandrolone decanoate is the long ester and has a half-life of about 7 to 12 days, which, to be honest, it is not as long as most people think. However, its metabolites stay in the body for a very long time after use. The detection time can be up to 18 months, so it's a very poor choice for anyone trying to cheat on a drug test. On the other hand, NPP, which is the shorter ester, has a much shorter half-life, around 2.7 days. So, if you are using NPP, you will need to inject at least 3 times per week to keep your hormone levels stable in the blood, while nandrolone decanoate can be dosed twice per week. Some people even do it once a week, which in my opinion is not ideal. Now, let's talk about the androgenic to anabolic ratio of nandrolone. It is 37 androgenic and 125 anabolic. Now, what do androgenic effects actually mean? These are things like deepening of the voice, increased body and facial hair, oily skin and acne, and even aggression. On the other hand, the anabolic effects are the benefits that we want. Things like increased muscle mass through stimulating muscle protein synthesis, increased bone density, and the quicker recovery after workouts or injuries. All anabolic androgenic steroids have both androgenic and anabolic properties, but the ratio between them varies depending on each compound. And we always compare these ratios to testosterone because testosterone is considered the most balanced anabolic androgenic steroid, as it has androgenic anabolic ratio of 100 to 100. Now, I have to mention something important. These anabolic androgenic ratios are determined in lab experiments on rats, so they are really just a reference, not something that always translates directly into real world. As we have seen in the last video with halo testing, sometimes the lab numbers don't match the actual experience. But in the case of nandrolone, I do believe the 37 to 125 ratio is actually realistic in the real world. Let's move now to the side effects of nandrolone. Nandrolone is classified as an anabolic steroid with mild androgenic properties, which makes it a great option for people who are concerned about hair loss. It's actually considered one of the safest anabolic androgenic steroids when it comes to protecting your hairline. That said, side effects like acne and oily skin can still show up, especially if the doses are high. When nandrolone interacts with the 5-alpha reductase enzyme, it gets converted into dihydronandrolone, or DHN. This enzyme found in high amounts in areas like the skin, scalp, and prostate. But here is the key difference. DHN is much weaker than DHT. DHT is the hormone that causes most of the harsh androgenic side effects. So, because DHN is weaker, the androgenic side effects of nandrolone are much milder. And that is why taking a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor like finasteride with nandrolone doesn't make any sense. In general, nandrolone is considered a mild compound in terms of androgenic side effects, especially when compared to others like testosterone, halotestin, or dianabol. When it comes to estrogenic side effects, nandrolone is actually a very complex compound, but I will do my best to simplify it as much as possible. Nandrolone does convert to estradiol, but it does so at much lower rate than testosterone, roughly 20% of the aromatization rate of testosterone. So you might think that means less estrogen and in return fewer estrogenic side effects, right? Well, not exactly. Here is where things get tricky. Nandrolone can lower dopamine levels, which in turn can raise prolactin levels. Now, to be clear, prolactin can increase naturally, even without using any anabolic androgenic steroids. It can go up from high stress, overtraining, or even just poor sleep. And in those cases, it is usually not a problem. But when you add nandrolone into the mix and it starts lowering dopamine levels while prolactin levels go up, that is when you have got a real issue, because prolactin increases the concentration and sensitivity of estrogen receptors, especially in breast tissue, which means you are more likely to develop gynecomastia. Now, let's be very clear here. Gynecomastia doesn't happen from high prolactin directly. Estrogen is still the main driver behind it, but prolactin amplifies the estrogen's effects in that tissue. So, it just makes estrogen side effects more powerful. And that is not all. High prolactin can also lead to something very embarrassing for men, lactation, which is nipple discharge, not something you want to deal with. That is why managing estrogen alone isn't always enough when using nandrolone. You also need to keep an eye on prolactin levels. So, what can you do if you start experience side effects? You really can't guess here at all. You have to do blood work and see where your hormones are at. If your estrogen is elevated, you can manage it with aromatase inhibitors or adjusting your cycle design by lowering the dose of the highly aromatizing compounds. For prolactin, a simple and effective first step is vitamin B6. Even better, go with P5P, which is active form of vitamin B6. This can help control prolactin to a decent level. But if prolactin-related side effects are very strong, you may need to consider cabergoline. Cabergoline is a dopamine agonist. It is powerful and effective, but it does affect brain chemistry. So I would always try to avoid it unless it is absolutely necessary. Regards the cardiovascular side effects of nandrolone. Nandrolone will have a negative impact on cholesterol levels, just like all anabolic androgenic steroids. Studies have shown that nandrolone has a slightly more negative effect on HDL compared to testosterone, but it is not significant when compared to oral steroids. Nandrolone can also increase sodium retention, which can lead to a significant rise in blood pressure. So you really have to keep that in mind, especially if you are already hypertensive. I would highly recommend that your diet should be very strict, especially if you are using nandrolone. You can't get away with eating junk food or having regular cheat meals, because if you do so, you will hold too much sodium and water, which puts unnecessary stress on your heart and can raise your blood pressure significantly. I would also recommend supplementing with healthy fats and doing regular cardio. Personally, I think HIIT training is a better option for heart health. Now, don't get me wrong, steps are great for increasing your daily caloric output, but they didn't do much for your cardiovascular health. You need to challenge your cardiovascular health system with structured cardio training, and even with all that, it still might not be enough. You may need to introduce blood pressure medications like ARBs to keep your blood pressure under control. That being said, if you do everything right, your diet, cardio, supplementation, it still doesn't completely eliminate the cardiovascular risks, especially in the long run. So, it's more of a harm reduction strategy, not risk elimination. Before we get into the next point, which is nandrolone and testosterone suppression, I have to mention that YouTube doesn't really like to promote this type of content. So, you may never see my videos again in the future. So, if you found value in this video, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you get notified when I upload the next videos. That way, you won't miss out any content in the future. And now, let's talk about nandrolone and testosterone suppression. Nandrolone is a very strong suppressive compound. It will cause a complete shutdown of your natural testosterone production, and the suppression would happen quickly. That is believed to be because nandrolone acts like a progestin. It activates the progesterone receptor, and progestins also cause shutdown of the HTPA axis. Now, here is the important part. Recovering your natural testosterone production after using nandrolone can be very difficult, even if you run a full PCT. So, that is something you really need to keep in mind, especially if you are not fully sure or ready to commit to lifetime TRT. There is another issue that happens to many users who run nandrolone, and that is erectile dysfunction. This sometimes happens because of elevated prolactin levels, but it could also be caused by low DHT, which happens because of the increased conversion to THN, something we already talked about at the beginning of this video. And sometimes it might even be caused by low estradiol levels. So, once again, you can't guess here. You need to do blood work to identify the root cause of the issue. After that, you will need to make some adjustments. That could mean reducing the dose of nandrolone and adjusting your cycle design, or introducing other medications like dopamine agonist, or possibly an aromatase inhibitor if your estrogen is too high. So, in my opinion, nandrolone is not a suitable compound for beginners at all, especially for those who haven't made the decision to go on TRT yet. When it comes to nandrolone cycles, there are some people out there who promote nandrolone-only cycles, which I am personally not a fan of. Testosterone should always be the base of any cycle, because it is the primary hormone your body relies on for proper function. It also converts to estrogen and DHT, which are both essential for many biological functions, and they also play a big role in overall cycle results and your sense of well-being. When it comes to nandrolone effects on mental health and sense of well-being, nandrolone is more neurotoxic than testosterone, especially when used in high doses and for long periods of time. It can also affect memory on the long run. Nowadays, many people report feeling depressed when they use nandrolone. So for some, it can be challenging mentally. But here is an interesting contrast. Back in the old school bodybuilding days, we didn't really hear anyone complaining about these side effects. Deca was standard in every off-season cycle, and people just ran it without any issues. So maybe the reason for that They just didn't know about these side effects back then. So they didn't notice them. But now, people are more educated about these compounds, and we are more aware of these side effects. And once you are aware of something, you are more likely to feel it. It is kind of like when you are prescribed a new medication, you read the list of all side effects, and suddenly you start to have every side effect on this list. However, if you hadn't read the list, you might not have noticed anything at all. Now, with that said, in my opinion, that might be also because the world we are living in today, where mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and chronic stress are becoming more and more common. Life has become much harder and more demanding. So maybe it is not just nandrolone. Maybe these problems are already there, and nandrolone just amplifies what is already under the surface. Now, the next point we are going to talk about is nandrolone's effects on the joints. There is a very weak scientific evidence that nandrolone can actually heal joints. However, there are many anecdotal reports from users who say they have seen amazing improvements as nandrolone increases joint lubrication and promotes collagen synthesis, which is a great advantage for lifting heavy in the off-season. But let's be clear, it doesn't heal the root cause of the injury. So, if you have a real damage, it is not going to fix it. That is why some people like to combine a low dose of nandrolone with their TRT just for joint relief. And honestly, if that is the only reason for taking it, a low dose can go a long way. Something like 50 to 100 milligrams per week is usually more than enough. But in the next point, we'll cover nandrolone dosages for medical conditions and how it is used among athletes. For medical purposes, the standard dosage of nandrolone decanoate was usually around 50 to 100 milligrams every 3 to 4 weeks for both men and women. In the case of renal anemia, men were typically given 100 to 200 milligrams per week, while women were given 50 to 100 milligrams per week. For NPP, medical doses were usually around 25 to 50 milligrams per week. Also, for both men and women among athletes, the most common dose for both nandrolone decanoate and NPP ranges between 200 to 800 milligrams per week. But in most cases, it is somewhere between 400 to 600 milligrams per week. And of course, there are people who push well beyond that range, but that comes of course with a higher risk. Nandrolone in general is known as the classic muscle builder for the off-season. Nandrolone decanoate or NPP really shine in this phase. That is where they do their best work, helping with adding new muscle tissue and also lubricating the joints, which allows for joint relief and the ability to train heavy. Nandrolone is a tried and true compound that bodybuilders relied on back in the old school bodybuilding days. And you will still hear those old school guys swear by it, saying it is the best compound for adding real size in the off-season. But I have to say, the popularity of nandrolone decanoate has gone down a lot in the recent years. And when you do see people running nandrolone today, it is usually NPP, since it is fast-acting and easier to manage in terms of side effects and clearance time. Now, many people avoid 19-NOS completely these days, and instead, they run testosterone with DHT derivatives like masterone or primobolan in the off-season. And honestly, Primo has become a real trend in the recent years. You see it in a lot of modern cycle designs for lean growth, as it has mild side effects and it is much easier to manage. I think also social media plays a big role in that, because now everyone is trying to stay in shape year-round, and nandrolone can make you look a little bit soft and make you hold some water. When it comes to contest prep, I really don't see a place of nandrolone decanoate at all. Maybe NPP could be used in the early stages of prep, since it clears out faster and won't stay in your system too long. Now, in my opinion, nandrolone in general is a great drug for anyone trying to get big and add real muscle tissue in the off-season. But if you are using it for the first time, I would highly recommend starting with NPP, because it is fast-acting, so if you experience any side effects, you can adjust the dose or even stop it completely, and those side effects will go away much faster. However, if you start with nandrolone decanoate and you get side effects, you are going to suffer from these side effects for many weeks until it clears out from your system. And of course, I don't recommend nandrolone for beginners at all, As we discussed today, it is a hard compound to manage, and if you are not committed to TRT and plan to do PCT after your cycle, you may have a very hard time recovering your natural testosterone production. So, for beginners, it is just better to stay away from it. And now, let's talk about the availability and supply of nandrolone. Nandrolone decanoate and NPP are still produced by some pharmaceutical companies, but overall, their production has declined over the years. That being said, they are still very available from underground labs. The pharma grade of nandrolone decanoate and NPP are usually dosed at 25 milligrams or 50 milligrams per milliliter. These are typically found in ampoules and are intended for medical use. On the other hand, underground labs commonly dose nandrolone decanoate at 200 milligrams per milliliter, and NPP is usually dosed at 100 milligrams per milliliter. Both are often sold in 10 milliliter vials or single-dose ampoules. You will find nandrolone decanoate sold under different brand names, such as Decabolic or Nandrolona. These are just brand names, but the compound itself remains the same, nandrolone decanoate. You will also see NPP on the market under the brand names Phenylpropionate or Durabolic. Again, these are just brand names, but it is still the same compound, Nandrolone Phenylpropionate or NPP. Now, a lot of users, even professional bodybuilders, prefer other compound over nandrolone. It is often used as a replacement for nandrolone for those who don't respond well to nandrolone. This compound is equipoise, and I have made a detailed video about it. So, click on this video to learn more about equipoise.